Okay, but it doesn't help if you're singing in the sound check because I don't think you'll be singing during the normal show.
You don't want to do D3 Datacast the musical?
I do not want to do that.
Greetings and welcome to the D3 Datacast. I'm Zach Snyder here with Matt Snyder, my co-host. As always, how you doing, Matt?
I'm the co-host with the most. I'm doing well. Thanks for having me on as always, Zach.
Well, this is an exciting show because it's Final Four week here finally, but let's start as we always do by looking backwards. Let's starting in the Sweet 16 round, the first game of the day Friday. UW-Whitewater knocked off Johns Hopkins 83-82 in overtime in a game played at Randolph-Macon. Nichols with the big 86-68 win over Stockton. Nichols had the nice run to the Sweet 16. They were a little bit, I don't know if you want to say Cinderella, but maybe one of the least likely teams to make it in. And we said in the previous episode in the Sweet 16 round, hey Nichols, here we go, your favorites here, and they did more than cover the computer line here. Impressive 86-68 win over Stockton. Congratulations on a great season to the Bison. And then another real interesting game in that first set, Wheaton knocked off St. Joseph, Connecticut, another one of our pre-tournament favorites. Wheaton gets the 74-67 win in really a game of runs. I think it was 7-0 start for Wheaton. Then St. Joseph stabilized, came back. They had a 2-point lead at the half, and then Wheaton outscores them 47-38 in the second half to defeat one of the, all season seems like it was St. Joseph and Randolph-Macon, kind of the 1-2. And then there in that early block, St. Joseph goes down. We'll get to the other one in a moment. But finishing off that first block, Rowan goes down in defeat to UW-Oshkosh by a surprising score, 91-72. This is an interesting one we talked about last week, the difference in tempos. UW-Oshkosh had no problem, I guess, playing faster. The 91-72 score, seeing Oshkosh scoring 91 is shocking in itself, but, it wasn't like they had to outlast Rowan in a 91-88 game or something like that. So hats off to the Oshkosh Titans knocking off Rowan. And then we get to the hosts in the afternoon set. And Matt, this is one that we had scheduled from the very beginning, the Sweet 16 matchup between Oswego State and Randolph-Macon. Randolph-Macon, of course, the number 1 overall seed by the NCAA, which the computer rankings agree with. Your efficiency margin rankings have had Randolph-Macon in that one spot. Yeah. But Oswego State, for most of the year, have been one of those computer darlings. So this, in terms of the computer rankings, was a 1 versus 3 matchup in the Sweet 16. And really impressive for Oswego State. Not only did they kind of survive that first punch, we heard Raul Placeres mention on the QCast that when you go into Randolph-Macon, you got to hang on for those first 5 or 10 minutes. But really, it was Oswego State landing that first punch, and it put Randolph-Macon in the position having to deal with Oswego State that so many teams. It's a familiar place for so many teams who are playing Randolph-Macon to have to kind of fight back and not really feel like they're dictating the game. But really, Oswego State, really impressive, validating that number 3 spot by the computers in taking down Randolph-Macon 74-63. Randolph-Macon struggled from 3, but this really wasn't so much what Randolph-Macon did wrong. This was a really impressive outing by Oswego State. Josh Merkel tweeted after the game, they said if they were going to go out, they wanted someone to beat them, not beating themselves, and certainly Oswego State did that. All right, the other big margin of the day was at Swarthmore, where Swarthmore beat Keene State 82-58. And Matt, it was just Swarthmore being that much better on this day than Keene State. You look at how that score breaks down by half, and it was 41-28 at halftime, and then the second half it was 41 for Swarthmore again and 30 for Keene State. So you look at that 82-58, and boy, it feels like a true number, at least on that day, because it was a tale of 2 very even halves in getting there. And then at Christopher Newport, the captains get the 72-60 win over Mary Hardin Baylor. Josiah Johnson clearly limited by, I believe, a wrist injury. But, Ty Prince was fantastic on the day. He really tried to carry them, but in the end, Christopher Newport was just too much for the crew there. Without Josiah Johnson at full strength. And then the nightcap, Mount Union, super impressive performance against North Park, who have had a great season in their own right. Mount Union comes out with the 102-85 win. We knew this was probably going to be a high tempo game. North Park plays some of the most aggressive full court defense in the country. But Mount Union is no stranger to playing at an increased pace. They play faster than average. A 56-47 halftime score. So big numbers there in the first half. And Mount Union just really pulling away very impressively for the 102-85 win. So that wraps up the Sweet 16. Matt, any thoughts from Friday?
Yeah, I'll just go through a few. That just starting at the end there, that North Park Mount Union game, we talked heading into it that if there was a team that maybe could get through North Park's kind of ball pressure, turnover style, it could be Mount Union. I think that proved to be the case. Mount Union had 15 turnovers, which is kind of a normal, kind of an averagey type game across Division III. So that didn't hamper them too much. The Mary Hardin Baylor Christopher Newport game really would have liked to see um, maybe a healthy Josiah Johnson. That one could have been different. Mary Hardin Baylor kept trying to climb back. Ty Prince had a huge game for Mary Hardin Baylor, but Christopher Newport was always just able to stay one step ahead of them. And then going back, I think one other game I wanted to talk about, that UW-Oshkosh Rowan game. If you calculate the possessions, there's a huge point number there for UW-Oshkosh. This was only really like a 72 possession game for calculated possessions. So it was really, I think I didn't get to watch a ton of this game with all the games going on. I was trying to watch chunks of each one, but it kind of seemed like UW-Oshkosh was able to be the one kind of dictating the tempo here, and they were able to get their efficient offense rolling, whether that was easy looks in transition or just kind of running their offense and getting points. So even though they put up a huge point number, they didn't really have to run with Rowan. I think they were able to kind of, it was a little bit more of a medium style, but maybe more towards Oshkosh. I think sometimes when you play these games with disparate styles, it's whoever is the team that can dictate to the other team to play their way. And I think maybe Oshkosh won out a little bit. And then I think we would be remiss if we didn't talk about Nichols a little bit more. Great run into the Elite Eight. We saw them with a big win over Stockton, huge margin, 18 points. But our computer, the efficiency ratings has favored Nichols in a bunch of these games. They were favored against Stockton, not by this margin, but they were favored by Stockton. They were favored even back at the first game against Rochester by, I think, a half a point. I think the computer actually liked Middlebury in that matchup, but it thought that Nichols would be competitive. So some good matchups, and credit to Nichols, they took advantage of it, and Stockton just could not match them for tempo, for pace, and their ability just to put the ball in the basket.
Yeah, Matt, as Nichols has made this run, it kind of made me think of the beloved 2005 Calvin team, that we followed through to the Final Four. A team that wasn't maybe getting a lot of press throughout the year, but just came together, was absolutely playing their best basketball at the right time, and made an impressive run. So yeah, hats off to Nichols. And hearing their coach on Hoopsville, and he was on the QCast as well. Just clearly, this is a team that you had to figure some things out early, but came together and were definitely playing their best basketball here at tournament time.
Yep.
All right, so moving on to Saturday Elite Eight games. Right off the bat, UW-Whitewater keeps their run going, knocking off Oswego State. We talked about that Oswego State-Randolph-Macon game in the Sweet 16 being like a national championship caliber type matchup, and it was a great game. But that's not to say that the winner coming out of that was going to waltz through to the national championship. And here you see Oswego State, the very next night, comes out and gets knocked out. UW-Whitewater picks up a big win, move on to Fort Wayne. And then we just talked about Nichols. They got off to a great start, had a 7-point lead at Swarthmore, but what was it, about a bucket with about 2 seconds left, put Swarthmore up 78-77. Nichols comes down the court, doesn't get a shot off in time, and their season comes to a unfortunate end there. But they were playing great basketball right down to the very end, made a great run and a great effort, here in the Elite Eight, but they come up just short. And then, Christopher Newport is also through to the Final Four, having defeated Wheaton 76-70. Credit Wheaton here because this was a big early lead for Christopher Newport, and Wheaton made a game of it, but in the end, it was a 6-point margin there. And then in the final game of the night in Alliance, Ohio, Mount Union with the 78-67 win over Oshkosh to get the Purple Raiders into the Final Four.
Yeah, going back to that Swarthmore Nichols game, I think that was the game of the night as far as just excitement factor. I still don't even completely know how Swarthmore pulled that one out. It feels like Nichols was in control for pretty much the entire game. Even in the second half, it felt like Swarthmore was able to claw it down to maybe 3 points at a few times, and then boom, 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 a couple of turnovers, some easy baskets, some made shots. Nichols was right back out by 7, 8, 9, 10 points, and I just didn't think that Swarthmore was going to be able to sustain enough to come back. And they did somehow. They just kind of reeled them back in. Got maybe some more turnovers of their own. To me, maybe this isn't really fair. To me, it felt like 3/4 of the game or so, maybe even more, Swarthmore let Nichols dictate to them how the game was going to be played. And then at one point they decided, hey, we're pretty good too. Like maybe let's maybe impose our own little will on this game a little bit instead of just reacting to what Nichols is throwing out there. And I don't know if I'm just reading some like post game narrative into this, but Swarthmore came up big. They had some of their own turnovers. They got some of their own easy buckets, some hard fought buckets, and then somehow were able to get the ball with just a few seconds left, put that little jumper in the lane in, and come away with the win. But that was an incredible game. I thought right up until the game went to 0, I thought Nichols was headed to the Final Four. I thought they had the game under control. I thought that they've made huge plays throughout this entire tournament. Even this game, they had made huge plays. They were outstanding. I thought that they were going to be able to do it, but Swarthmore pulls it out at home. That was just a tremendous, tremendous game to follow. That Oswego State UW-Whitewater game, the first game of the night, I watched a whole bunch of that, especially in the first half before the other games had kind of really gotten going. To me, that was almost for Oswego State, the Randolph-Macon game in reverse, where they were kind of now the favorite after knocking off Randolph-Macon. Whitewater came in as kind of the underdog of sorts, but it was kind of Whitewater that was pacing that game most of the way. I think Oswego State did have a halftime lead, but then kind of right out of the gate, Whitewater jumped out to another lead and kind of just kept the margin going. We had seen that with Oswego State the night before against Randolph-Macon. Randolph-Macon had kept trying to kind of close that margin, and Oswego State just always had enough, and that was Whitewater on Saturday night. And to see them get the 77-74 victory coming out of the WIAC, what were they, maybe third place in the WIAC, and now they're the team in the Final Four. We talked about that league maybe not being quite as good as it was last year, and I think it still wasn't, but they still have a bunch of good teams, and you know, a good league like this, like we saw with Elmhurst last year out of the CCIW, you get that kind of second or third place team, whatever Elmhurst was. These good leagues, UAA, CCIW, ODAC, could have been here. They can play with the big boys, and we've seen kind of this parity across Division III this year. And a team like Whitewater in the Final Four, not exactly what we expected, but maybe we expected something like this to happen for sure.
Absolutely. So let's use that actually to get into our deep dive on the Final Four matchups here, like we've done going into each of the other rounds or other weekends here. So with the first semifinal, 5:30 p.m. on Thursday, we'll have Christopher Newport against Swarthmore. Based on the total season profile that they've put out there, they're the number 4 ranked team based on efficiency margin. You see how that comes out. They're 114.4 adjusted offensive number and 86.9 adjusted defensive number for an overall efficiency margin of 27.5. And Swarthmore number 6 overall with an efficiency margin of 25.1, 115.3 in terms of adjusted offense, which is the highest number here. So you want to think about them as being the top offensive team in the Final Four, but a 90.2 adjusted defensive number here. So put it all in the computer. It's not surprisingly, this is looking like a pretty even matchup. Christopher Newport with a slight edge. 56-44 in terms of win probability, and a computer line, if you want to think of it in terms of like a wagering spread of just a point and a half. Anything jump out to you just in terms of the matchup between Christopher Newport and Swarthmore? Now I know, Matt, we have an even deeper dive coming up, but just in terms of what we see here with the efficiency margin numbers.
Yeah, just it looks like a very even game. Fourth and sixth best teams all season by efficiency margin. There's not a huge gap there. Advantage Christopher Newport. And the interesting thing, the advantage for Christopher Newport is more on their defense. They both are offensively elite, I would say, but Christopher Newport also gets it done a little bit better on the defensive side. So they're overall similarly shaped teams, but I think Christopher Newport is that's why the computer likes them is because of their defense. Interesting here. We're going to talk about the other game here, but the four teams remaining are the numbers 4, 8, 9, and 13 offenses in the country that we've seen this season. So we've got all offensively elite teams here coming to Fort Wayne.
Yep. So as you mentioned, Wisconsin-Whitewater is ranked 33rd overall by the computer. So they look like a bit of an outlier here. But as you mentioned, you look at that offensive category there, the 114, very much in line with the other teams here. But they're just a little bit lower in total offense or total efficiency margin because of that defensive number is a bit still better than average, but not quite as good as the other teams here at 96.1. But we should also point out here that this is based on total resume, every game that they played over the course of the year. And as we've talked in the past, sometimes there's very good reasons for why, the total profile may not fit for how a team is playing at a particular time. And I think it's very clear at this point, Wisconsin-Whitewater is playing at a level higher than kind of the sum of the parts of their season in total. Just, to kind of put it in different terms, looking at the run that they've made here, who knows what kind of standing they would have had on the bubble had they not won the WIAC, but they did win the WIAC, starting with beating La Crosse in the semifinal, Oshkosh in the final. Then they beat Wabash on a neutral court at Case Western. They beat Johns Hopkins, who was the number 5 ranked team by the computer, on a neutral court. Beat Oswego State, the number 3 team, on a neutral court. And so they have certainly earned their way in to the Final Four here. So if you want to call them an outlier based on that overall, season-long rank, fine. But, offensively, they're right there. And you look at the path that they've taken, I don't think anyone has a more impressive path here to Fort Wayne than what Wisconsin-Whitewater has done, going back to the conference tournament semifinals even.
Yeah, they don't stand out from these other teams on their offense at all. They're right up there with them. In fact, they're better rated on offense than Mount Union is, who they'll play. Where they don't quite stack up, it looks like, by the computers for their season-long resume, like you said, is their defense, where they're closer to average. They're the number 118 defense in the country, where these others are the number 13, the number 32, and number 34. So we saw some offensively elite teams here, not quite as defensively elite all across the board. But Whitewater there is a little bit of an outlier. We'll see that later on some of the numbers. I think that's also kind of how they've played in this tournament. They've probably beaten that defensive rating for the tournament, particularly beating a team like Case Western Reserve, who also has a tremendous offense, and to be able to kind of hold them in check to some degree. But I think this is really how they've won. They've won with a pretty good defense, but not they haven't been crushing anyone on the defensive end, but their offense has been clicking, and they're going to be a force to be reckoned with down there in Fort Wayne.
And we just have to look back 1 year to see something similar happen, right? In terms of the overall efficiency margin, Wabash didn't look great, but they rode the strength of an elite offense into the Final Four, and so you could say Wisconsin-Whitewater has done something similar here.
Yeah, and
And then
Wabash was like a more extreme version of Whitewater, where I think their
right,
defense actually rated a little bit below average, but their
yeah.
offense was so far and above like the number 1 or number 2 offense in the country. They're like a 120 or something offense that it carried them.
Mount Union ranks 13th overall in terms of efficiency margin, 113.5 on offense, right in line with kind of what we've seen here, and then 89.9, pretty similar here, similar shape to what we see with Swarthmore, similar ranges. The one thing to note here in the adjusted tempo margin, Mount Union plays at a slightly faster pace than some of the other teams here. You know, a lot of similarities here between Newport, Swarthmore, and Wisconsin-Whitewater in that kind of low 70s, with Mount Union kind of pushing it into the mid 70s. So not a huge difference, but it will be interesting to see. At least in the first game that Mount Union plays, we'll see if they get to play a second game. But maybe that's something they look to take advantage of, is to play a faster game, knowing that they like to do that a little bit more than some of the other teams here.
Yeah, the tempo
Uh,
differences aren't very extreme. Mount Union's probably only like 2 or 3 possessions faster than average. The other three teams are maybe 2 or 3 possessions slower than average. So not too much. It's not like a Rowan who we saw who'd like to play up in the 80s,
right,
or like a system team who's like far and away even above that. So it's
right,
maybe just slight differences in tempo here between the four teams.
yep. So the computer likes Mount Union, a 65% chance to win here, and a 4.5 point margin on the computer line. But like we said, this is based on the season
Yeah.
long profile. So you can make your mental adjustments. Probably if the guys in Vegas were making a line here, maybe that's even a little bit closer, because you bump Wisconsin Whitewater up a little bit based on how they've been playing recently over kind of the total profile over the course of the entire season.
Yeah, and these other teams have all beaten good teams too through this tournament as well. So, we've seen anyone can win this year. We've seen Randolph-Macon get knocked off, and then Oswego State get knocked off. So we know Whitewater
Yep.
can beat anyone. Mount Union has certainly, they just beat UW-Oshkosh, who was looking strong. Christopher Newport got through. Wheaton, who had gotten through St. Joseph. So it's anyone's ball game here, I think, in Fort Wayne. I wouldn't be surprised with almost any result.
So since we are down to the final four teams, we're going to go a little bit even deeper than we've done on our deep dives previously. So some people may be familiar with what are called the four factors in basketball matchups. Matt, will you start running us through here? The first matchup, based on the first game we'll see Thursday, Swarthmore against Christopher Newport.
Yeah, so the four factors, we'll run through them here: effective field goal percentage, turnover rate, offensive rebounding rate, free throw rate. These are kind of just said to be the most predictive metrics as far as who's a good team, who's going to be a successful team, or who might win a particular matchup. So here's effective field goal percentage between Swarthmore and Christopher Newport. This just adjusts for the fact that a 3-point shot is worth 50% more than a 2-point shot. So shooting 1 out of 3 on 3-pointers gives you the same amount of points as shooting 1 out of 2 on 2-pointers. So effective field goal percentage kind of takes that and puts it into a field goal percentage number that we're more familiar with, but it doesn't matter how you make those shots or take those shots. It's all the same. So these two teams, as you can see, are very similar. Offense in the dark blue, kind of NCAA Division III average in the gray in the middle, and then what they allow on the defensive side in the light blue. Very similar here. In fact, so similar, I had initially thought I had cropped the same graph and accidentally put it under both teams, but you can see they're actually slightly different. Swarthmore's a little bit better on offense as far as scoring about a 540 effective field goal percentage. Christopher Newport's more in the 530 range, but Christopher Newport's defense, they're stingier and allow opponents to shoot only like a 430 effective field goal percentage, and Swarthmore is kind of more like a 440, 450. So put these all in a hopper, and who knows what's actually going to happen. I would expect the numbers to kind of come out more average because you have kind of pretty good offenses and pretty good defenses playing each other. So these two teams are very, very similar when it comes to effective field goal percentage and how their offense and defense looks. And it kind of mirrors what we saw above in the efficiency, right? Swarthmore was a little bit better on the offensive side, and Christopher Newport was a little bit better on the defensive side.
Yep, that makes sense.
Moving on to the next one is turnover rate. So this is how often do you turn the ball over, or on defense force the opponent to turn the ball over. You can see again two teams that are very similar in as far as what happens. Neither side of the ball do turnovers happen very frequently with these teams. They protect the ball on offense, but they're not really turning the other team over more than the average team does. In fact, both of them are a little bit less than average. So I would expect us not to see a ton of turnovers in this game. If these kind of numbers hold, both teams will be content to kind of, I would think about it to get into the half court set, play solid defense. You're not really gambling too much to force a turnover. You're just going to play solid defense, and that's how you're going to limit opponents to score that way. That's kind of what I read a number like this to say.
And we go back to the efficiency margin here. You look at their defensive numbers; both come out very good, and you you can see the way they get there isn't by turning people over. You're going to get a shot, but you go back to that first slide in terms of effective field goal percentage, and it may not be a good shot. You're not as likely to make it against these teams, the average team. So you will get a shot, but it may not be a great shot.
Yeah, and we're familiar with teams like this. That's kind of how Calvin played this year. They didn't force a ton of turnovers, but they limited the amount of good shots the other teams could get. So that was kind of how our Calvin Knights had played similarly as well. The third four factor that we will go over here is offensive rebound percentage. So kind of how many second opportunities do you give yourself and how do you limit the opponent's opportunities? So you can see here Swarthmore is kind of a classically good offensive rebounding team, and then they also limit the opponent's chances. They clean up the defensive glass as well. Christopher Newport, very good on the offensive rebounding side, but only slightly better than average as far as limiting opponents' second chances. For Christopher Newport, John Hines and Trey Barber are their leaders when it comes to offensive rebounds. Even at 6'4", Hines is like a tremendous rebounder. Is going to get in there and clean up the glass. And for Swarthmore, it's their big guys, Caprice and Corzine, and they're both the leaders, I think, on the offensive and defensive glass. So I would expect, again, both offenses to try to get their second opportunities. I don't exactly know how many they'll get, but looking at this chart, I think Swarthmore will get some, and I think Christopher Newport will get some as well. But Swarthmore's been better at limiting their opponents from getting them, so maybe they'll be able to keep Barber and Hines off the glass a little bit.
Yeah, interesting to see these two come, side by side. And this will definitely be one to watch the live stats as the game is going on, because here I think this is one that's going to tell the tale. Just you have one side that's really good at getting offensive rebounds, and one side, on the other side, they're really good at preventing offensive rebounds. So which side's going to be able to break through?
Yeah. I will say, for what it's worth, one of the reasons I think Wheaton was able to claw back into that game against Christopher Newport was they had a terrific offensive rebounding game. Wheaton's typically a bad offensive rebounding team, and Christopher Newport usually limits it a little bit. But for whatever reason, maybe Wheaton just knew they had to go after it a little bit more or whatever. But Wheaton broke the trend, and you would have said that they would have had a very poor offensive rebounding game, but they didn't, and maybe that was a reason why they were able to make that a game toward the end, is that they were able to hit the offensive glass a little higher than not. I don't know if that was the case or not. I didn't go back and break down the film, but I did see that in the numbers as I was looking at these today. And the fourth factor is free throw rate. So another way to score, getting to the line, making your shots. So free throw rate is your free throws divided by your field goal attempts. So how many kind of additional chances do you get at scoring points? Here, there's not a whole ton. Both teams are just kind of a tick above average at getting to the line. Swarthmore will put their opponents on the line a little bit more than average, so that's maybe a ding to their defense. Christopher Newport kind of prevents their opponents from getting to the line very much, so they play defense without fouling, which is strong. Interesting to note here, we're in the Final Four. All the teams are good, so you kind of look at all these categories, and for the most part, it's their offense is really good and their defense is really good, or maybe they're only like average-ish. So we'll see all these teams are mostly all pretty good in mostly all of these categories, but some small differences here or there could be the difference in the game or could stand out when you're talking about elite teams like this. So now taking a look at the other matchup, Mount Union and Whitewater. So going back to effective field goal percentage here, you can see Mount Union is very similarly shaped as the first two. Their offense is very strong. Their defense is also very strong. They limit kind of in a classical way. Whitewater, though, is a different story. They have a very elite offense with the others, like we saw in the efficiency metrics. But here, they've been allowing their opponents to get better looks or to make shots at a higher clip than these other teams have. So has Whitewater found something recently to correct this, or will that be the story of Mount Union kind of being able to score with more effectiveness? We've seen Whitewater be able to take care of business against Oswego State and Johns Hopkins, teams that we've seen in the top 5 of the efficiency ratings for kind of the last few weeks here. So they can beat other elite teams like this. But in the season-long metrics, Whitewater does not come out as strong on the defensive side of the ball, an effective field goal percentage, like the other 3 teams do. Turnover rate is one where Mount Union stands out on both sides of the ball. They're very good at limiting the turnovers when they're on offense, and they're pretty good at limiting or at forcing turnovers on the other side of the ball. Colin Gurley, Christian Parker, Daryl Newsome, all they're their three leaders in steals. It's kind of more of a team event though for Mount Union rather than just a few individuals getting a ton of steals. I think it's just their defense. They're going to turn you over. They're going to put pressure on you to make good decisions, and so you really see it here. Standing out compared to the other teams we've seen as far as turnovers. They're really going to, they're better at limiting turnovers than the other teams are, and they're better at forcing turnovers, I think. When we look at Whitewater, we see they're offensively elite as well. I think one way is that they also limit turnovers. So we're going to kind of see those conflicting styles. Mount Union forces a lot of turnovers. Whitewater doesn't usually give up a lot of turnovers. But then on their defense, they're really only averagey as far as kind of forcing turnovers as well. So more similar to Christopher Newport or Swarthmore in that regard. So see if that could be advantage Mount Union is in the kind of taking care of the ball metrics here. That could lead to an extra possession or two that you get or that your opponent doesn't get. That could turn into a basket. And then moving on to offensive rebounding percentage, Mount Union's pretty interesting here. They rebound pretty well, not at an elite level, pretty well offensively, but they also give up a lot of second chances on defense. So could see a lot of offensive rebounds in this game. Whitewater's a little bit more similar to maybe like Swarthmore, although to a smaller degree in all directions, where they board well on the offensive glass, and they also kind of prevent the other team a little bit, although they're a little bit more averagey in that regard.
Yeah.
And go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to take these last two, offensive rebound percentage and turnover rate in tandem here, because when we're talking about elite offensive teams here, it's going to come down to those extra possessions, right?
Mm-hmm.
So where are they going to come from? Are they going to be Mount Union forcing turnovers and limiting those possessions by Whitewater and gaining possessions for themselves, or you look at offensive rebounding where maybe Whitewater has the edge in terms of their ability to get it compared to Mount Union's propensity to give up offensive rebounds, right? So you talk about those extra possessions; they're always key. But to give extra possessions to an elite offensive team, as we've seen, all four of these teams are, it's like you're giving away points at that time. You're not just giving away opportunities, but when you're giving extra possessions up to elite offensive teams, you're literally giving up points.
Yeah. So for Mount Union, right, they turn the other team over more than average, but they're also going to give you extra possessions on the offensive glass more than average. So can a team like Whitewater, if they fall victim to the turnover bug, can they make up for that in another way that's still going to give them as many looks as they need to score the points that they need to win the game?
Right. I mean, we're talking about really good teams here, but you can start to see some of the warts where maybe a game of this magnitude could turn in terms of, if Mount Union's doing what they usually do in terms of forcing turnovers, and they're limiting Whitewater from getting offensive rebounds, which is an area that Mount Union kind of has struggled with containing. Well, then you got to say advantage Mount Union. However, if Whitewater's able to contain the turnovers, keep themselves in check from turning it over against Mount Union, and they're finding some opportunities to come down with those offensive rebounds as Mount Union's been known to give up, then that's I think really the path where you're seeing an opportunity for Whitewater to advance.
Yeah. And I think the next slide as well, as we go here to free throw rate, is one we'll see for Whitewater possibly as an outlier on the offensive end as well. You can see when it comes to free throw rate, Mount Union gets to the line at a higher than average clip, and they allow kind of an averagey amount of free throws on the other end. Whitewater, on the other hand, gets to the line an awful lot, and defensively it's kind of also averagey as well. So one of the ways that Whitewater performs as an offensively elite team is getting to the free throw line. Miles Barnes-Table, Trevin Chisholm, they do a great job getting to the line and getting those extra shots with no one guarding you. Great way to put up points. And if you can knock them down, I think Barnes-Table is like almost 90% as far as his free throws. I think we'll have a slide on him coming up later on. But getting to the line a whole bunch, making those shots, that's difficult for the other team to make up. Kind of when you're giving up free points like that. So as far as free throw rate is concerned, of the four teams, Whitewater is definitely the outlier to the positive sense on their offense, is their ability to get to the line and knock down those shots.
Yeah, it's interesting the way that the bracket turns out and the way these four teams meet up, because I think this is any Final Four matchup you're going to get is going to be a tough game. But I think of the three possible opponents here, this is maybe what you'd say is the right opponent for Whitewater.
Yeah.
Compared to the other two, just kind of what we looked at in terms of what these teams typically are like in terms of turnovers and offensive rebounding. Like you can see the pathway for Whitewater to come away with a win here, even if you want to say they're kind of the maybe the outlier in terms of the overall season long resume in getting to Fort Wayne.
And we should also say it's very possible that none of these trends hold, and Whitewater doesn't get to the line or doesn't turn the ball over very much or whatever. These are just the season long trends, kind of ways to make predictions or expectations. But who knows what's going to actually happen when they get between the lines and tip the ball off. That's what's fun about watching the games.
So at this point, let's take a look at the updated tournament odds. We've enjoyed doing this along the way. The table gets smaller and smaller as we've gone, just with the fewer rounds out ahead of us. So now we're just down to percentage chance to win in the semifinal, and then to win that final on Saturday. So these numbers are familiar. We went through these earlier. 56% win probability for Christopher Newport, 44% for Swarthmore in their semifinal number one. In the second semifinal, Wisconsin Whitewater has a win probability of 35%, with Mount Union at 65%. Now, as we take that out now, heading into Final Four weekend, percentage chance to win the championship. Again, this is based on the season-long efficiency margin profile. Christopher Newport here is the favorite heading into the weekend with a 36.3% chance to win the championship. Mount Union would be second, 27.6%. Not surprising, considering we got the favorite in one semifinal and the favorite in the second semifinal. You gotta get to the final to win it. So the team more likely to get there is going to have the better chance to ultimately win it. But a 25.8% chance for Swarthmore, and Wisconsin Whitewater there heading into the weekend with a 10.2% chance to win it all. So Matt, as I look at it, I'd say you've got a favorite in Christopher Newport, and then two kind of teams in the middle with Swarthmore and Mount Union, and then Whitewater, at least in terms of the season-long profile, would be the surprise maybe to win it. But again, you go back to the WIAC semifinal and what they've done to date. I don't think it would be too shocking, but they've got the lowest odds by the computer here heading into the Final Four.
Yeah, I think looking at these numbers, no championship game pairing would be that surprising. We see the biggest quote unquote mismatch here is 35% to 65%. It's better than a 1 out of 3 chance of Whitewater advancing just based on these numbers. And I think you're absolutely correct. We've said it time and again this episode. Of these teams, it's probably mostly the case for Whitewater that they're not the same team now that they were in November or December. They're probably better, so they're probably closer to the margin of the other three teams. So if we were to look at only like the last 10 games and calculate an efficiency rating or something like that, I think they would probably come out even with these other four teams, and it would be like 56-44 for all of these games. But yeah, once we get to a championship game, it's going to be similar numbers, I think, as well. I'm not going to be surprised with any result. I think going into last year's tournament or Final Four, Randolph-Macon was a larger favorite, even though we had other good teams, particularly in Marietta. We had seen that semifinal between Randolph-Macon and Marietta was probably going to be the favorite the next night. I think maybe we see that here as well. But last year, I think, was maybe more of a more extreme version of this, where this year it looks like we're going to have, four teams that are heading into championship weekend with a very legitimate, real chance of taking home the trophy.
And then the other graphic here on the screen is just if you want to look ahead to a potential national championship game computer line, you can read it. So Christopher Newport would be a 7-point favorite over UW-Whitewater and a 3-point favorite over Mount Union. Swarthmore would be a 5-point favorite over Whitewater and a 1-point favorite over Mount Union. So again, like you said, whoever comes out of that first semifinal is likely the favorite, but not necessarily an overwhelming favorite or a favorite where, the other team winning would be a total surprise.
Yeah. Yeah, we're probably looking at, all of these semifinal games probably within a possession or two of the expected point differential. Championship game, probably a possession or two for all the games. You can make predictions and give percent chances and put down like point spreads and whatever. But these are all margins that we see overcome time and again. Again, Whitewater could win this almost just as easily as Christopher Newport could, even though Christopher Newport's the favorite, 36% chance to win, and Whitewater's the least favorite at just over 10%. But we're talking about thin margins now.
All right, so we reviewed the Sweet 16 at the top of the show. But we had 5 of those games as our pick slate for this past week. So Matt, take us through it.
Yeah,
And I'll just sit here and bask in the glory of another victorious week.
Yeah, we only had one game different for the Sweet 16. So here was the game. St. Joseph was 8.5-point favorites. We both took Wheaton. Wheaton won that game by 7 points, so we got the points. We both took UW-Oshkosh, who were 2.5-point favorites by the computer, and they won by 19 over Rowan, so we both get the point. Neither of us took Oswego State because we thought 3 points was just too small, and we thought, hey, there's got to be a bigger difference between these teams than the computer actually thinks. But no, Oswego State won that game by 11. And we both missed that one. Our one difference was Keene State at Swarthmore, which was the half-point margin, actually in favor of Keene State, who was the road team. Zach, you smartly went with Swarthmore, and they just controlled that game from start to finish. Was one of the most impressive victories of the weekend, was just what they had done to Keene State, who was a great team all season long. Avenging last year's tournament defeat was Swarthmore. You get the point and come one step closer to me. The last game of the evening for the Sweet 16 on our pick slate was North Park and Mount Union. That was a 3-point Mount Union advantage based on the computer line. We had both taken Mount Union, and they won handily by 17. So we both got that point. So let's look at the picks leaderboards. You were 4-1 last week, which takes you to 44-40. I was 3-2, which takes me to 45-39. With only championship weekend remaining, Zach, 1 point between us. We talked about the close margins between these teams in the Final Four. But I think the real story of the weekend that everyone's going to be talking about is only one pick separates you and I for the season-long picks leaderboard. We're not going to talk about Ryan Scott, who always posts his picks in the comments below because he, I think, destroyed us all season long. So congrats, Ryan. Other than that, Zach and I were only one pick apart. So it's a big one coming up. Are you ready for this week's slate, Zach?
I am. And let's give a little bit of a kind of introduction to what we're doing here, because it is a little bit different since there are only 3 games left, only 2 of which we actually know about the matchups. But in order to make this a 5-point week, in line with every other week that we've had, picking 5 games, we decided to pick the 2 semifinal games, and then to pick up the additional 3 points, we're doing a national championship call your shot, right? So we have to pick the 2 teams that will play in the game and then who will win. So the 3 points come from picking each of the actual final participants, and then an additional point if we can correctly pick the national champion, based on that game. So no computer line for that national championship. Call your shot. This is going to be straight. We got to pick who's going to be in it and who's going to win it, and that will be the additional 3 points to round out our 5 points for the week. And that will settle this season-long contest between the 2 of us.
I'm excited. All right, so for the games we know 2 of them. There are only 3 games remaining in the season, but we know the 2. First game is Christopher Newport versus Swarthmore, the early semifinal. The computer gives Christopher Newport 1.5-point advantage. Who do you like, Zach?
I will take Christopher Newport in this one. We talked about them being the favorite heading into the weekend, but as I looked at it a little bit more, these are fairly even teams, similarly shaped. Christopher Newport had a slight advantage, but as I look into it, Christopher Newport is also very similarly shaped in terms of their efficiency metrics offensively and defensively to Johns Hopkins, who Swarthmore is very familiar with. Swarthmore did finished the season with a 2-1 advantage over Johns Hopkins, but there was the one loss, and one of the wins they took. It took a big comeback. They were down. I don't know what it was, 17 points, something like that. It took a big comeback to defeat Johns Hopkins. So with Christopher Newport being kind of similarly shaped and probably like a better version of Johns Hopkins, I I don't know that Swarthmore would be able to make that kind of comeback. I will take the Captains.
I think this is going to be a tremendous game. While you were talking, I just thought of like a bunch of different explanations for why I'm going to take the team I'm going to take, and then I realized I have no idea what I'm talking about anyway. So I'm just going to throw all that all the way out. I'm going to take Christopher Newport as well. These two teams are very even. We saw it in the efficiency metrics. We saw it in the four factors, as you were just saying. I just have a feeling that Christopher Newport has the pieces, and they're going to be able to put it all together. They were so impressive in building up that huge lead against Wheaton. Now, unfortunately, Wheaton was able to take that almost all the way back. Wheaton had a shot to potentially go ahead that was in the air with only like 2 minutes left in that game. Didn't go in, and Newport was able to keep kind of the lead the whole time. So they survived that. It just seems to me that Christopher Newport does have all those pieces. Now, Swarthmore does as well. You talked about them coming back in one of those games. They also had to come back against Nichols kind of time and again, so they made that happen. They're a team that can come back. We just saw Christopher Newport almost give up a huge comeback to Wheaton, so maybe that doesn't portend great things for my pick here. I don't know what's going to happen, but I'm going to take the Captains to reach the championship game on Saturday.
Yeah, I'd like to say either of us is making that pick with a great deal of conviction, but I don't think either of
No,
us are.
no. That's a game. It's a game Swarthmore could easily win or cover. Maybe it's a 1 point Christopher Newport win. Maybe it's a 10 point Swarthmore win. Who knows?
Yeah.
The second game is UW-Whitewater versus Mount Union. The computer favors Mount Union by 4.5 points. So, Zach, who do you like?
I really wanted to go with Mount Union here, but as we've talked about, I think the computer's looking at these teams as they've represented themselves over the course of the whole year. So I think that's undercutting Whitewater a little bit right now. So I'll go on the Whitewater side here with the 4.5 points.
Yeah, you could be right. I like I said, I have no idea what I'm talking about at this point, but I'm going to go with Mount Union. I think 4.5. It's probably a pretty big number for a Final Four. So I do see your Whitewater pick there, but to me, Mount Union has basically taken care of business all season long. They just handled UW Oshkosh pretty well. We saw, Whitewater's beaten Oshkosh, but they've also lost to Oshkosh. I think those are two kind of similar teams as well. I think it's the Purple Raiders' year. I think that they're going to get to the championship game, and I think 4.5 points. I think they're going to be able to cover that. So that brings us to the call your shot. I think, Zach, you're going to go first. So I think you're going to pick your two championship teams, and then you're going to pick a winner.
Yeah, so I telegraphed the one with the first pick. So I have Christopher Newport in the final, and I have them. I did take Whitewater with the 4.5 points, but I'm going with Mount Union to reach the final, and I will take the Purple Raiders to win it all. I look at what they did last weekend, the scores in putting away North Park and Oshkosh. I think they're playing great ball. Give me the Purple Raiders.
So you have a lot of specific predictions for this week. Christopher Newport going to cover the 1.5. Whitewater's going to cover the 4.5, but Mount Union's going to win, and then Mount Union's going to go on to win the championship. So for all that to happen, you'd have a tremendous weekend, I think, Zach.
I am in the trail position here. I got to make up a game, right? So
yeah, well, that's true. My picks were both telegraphed up above. If Mount Union and Christopher Newport both cover those spreads, then they both make the championship game. So I have the same two teams as you, but I'm picking the opposite direction. And for me, Christopher Newport will get their first men's basketball national championship, if I am not mistaken about that. So congrats to the captains. I just picked you. I don't know if that's a good thing or not, but it's gonna. I'm just excited for championship weekend. I think we have 4 great teams here. I would not be surprised. We both picked Mount Union, Christopher Newport. So probably UW-Whitewater and Swarthmore are going to make the championship game, which maybe Ryan's going to pick below, and he's going to be correct because he's beaten us all season.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. Regardless, we're going to have 3 great games. It's going to be a lot of fun to watch. We will be there. We're looking forward to it. Hopefully to see some great games and also some people who've been watching our videos along the way. If you are a viewer and you are going to be in Fort Wayne, we'd love to say hi. Let us know in the comments below if you're going to be there, and we'll try to connect at some point.
And if you happen to see us walking around the arena, walking around the town, or in the hotel lobby, say hi, run up to us, and introduce yourself. We'd love to meet other D3 fans. That was part of the fun from last year when our first opportunity to go back since we were students ourselves. We got to meet a bunch of people who we'd only known as Twitter handles, but now they're actually real people that we got to meet, and that was fun. So if you are there, you see us, feel free to say hi, introduce yourself. You will not be bothering us or interrupting us at any by any stretch of the imagination. So definitely say hi.
Yeah, don't worry. Matt's not as standoffish
No,
as he appears on YouTube.
I am tremendously socially awkward in person, though. So just feel free to have an awkward interaction with me, and just know that that's fine.
Mailbag.
Mailbag. All right, you have the first one here, Zach.
We do. First one came here from Ryan Scott, the aforementioned Ryan Scott, who has been drubbing us in our own picks contest. Ryan asks, should Jalen Overway still win National Rookie of the Year over Miles Barnstable, despite how March has gone for the respective teams? What about Ben Pierce at Emory? Can we compare some numbers? Yes, Ryan, we can compare some numbers. So I put them all together so that we can look at them all side by side. It's kind of interesting. All three guys basically play, kind of 30-ish minutes for their team. If you want to go over to the scoring, Barnstable, in terms of the season overall average, a little bit lower than the other two at 16.2, but kind of all in that 16 to 18 point range. But I think it all comes down to what are you looking for in this type of award, because I think these are three great freshmen, but they've all kind of done it a little bit differently. If you look at Jalen Overway, you're talking about a 6'9", 250-pound freshman center. He you see the 18.6 points per game, and basically he's a double a night at just a tick under 10 rebounds per game. So you're getting the scoring, you're getting the rebounds, you're getting a few more block shots. The 59 assists, watching Jalen all season, it was impressive to me, especially when those doubles were coming. He really had an ability to pass out of that double team. So you see that in the 59 assists, which is kind of interesting. You see a 6'9", 250-pound freshman with more assists on the season than Miles Barnstable has, even with the additional games played. Yeah, so you're getting kind of the classic old school center profile with Jalen Overway. You're talking kind of the nightly double. And with Overway, you're also getting a big man who shoots basically 85% on his free throws, which you don't usually see. So that's big. You can't just go in there and hack him, put him on the free throw line, and he's gonna make one of two. So I think considering a player like Jalen Overway, you have to look at that free throw number as a real feather in his cap too. Now, Miles Barnstable, we talked about him and the run that Whitewater has had. He's certainly been part of that. Also, playing about 30 minutes a night. In terms of this list, we noted his scoring numbers are about a bucket less than the other guys, but he's doing it more efficiently than the other guys. So if you're looking in terms of a guy who's contributing maybe a similar level, but maybe a little bit more efficiently, you gotta like what Barnstable brings. And again, Matt, you noted he's shooting about almost 90% on his own free throws this year, and that's certainly a big part of the offensive success that Whitewater has been from the free throw line, and he's been a big part of that. And then with Ben Pierce, a guy scoring wise is right there, not maybe not as efficient as the other guys have been, now doing it a lot differently than Jalen Overway has, with more of an inside game. Pierce has more of the outside game, but not quite the shooting percentage that have been as efficient as Barnstable. But the other number that jumps off is the assist total. So I think it really comes down to what are you looking for when you're looking for a Rookie of the Year. I think these are three great guys, but they all kind of get there a little bit differently. So I also wanted to look, I made a list here just of the individual awards that these guys had. Jalen Overway was the MIAA MVP which obviously comes with him being placed on the first team. Barnstable was an all WIAC selection. They do things a little bit differently. Instead of having like a first team and second team in the WIAC, they just have like the all WIAC team and then a list of honorable mentions. So Barnstable was on that all WIAC team, and he was also voted the WIAC Newcomer of the Year, which is an award that is not given out in the MIAA. But I think we can safely assume that if Jalen Overway was the league MVP, that if they had a Newcomer of the Year, he certainly would have been it as well. Pierce was a UAA first team performer, and he was their Rookie of the Year as well. So, a lot of similar accolades. Overway does have the MVP to his credit, but the other two played in leagues that, without question, were better leagues. So they're going up against a lot of really great players for a top overall player of the player of the year or league MVP award. So if you wanted to play some theoretical games, you could say, okay, put Whitewater or Emory in the MIAA. Does either of those players win the MVP award over Jalen Overway? I don't know, maybe, but this is another way to maybe think of the question. So, Ryan, there's your comparison, but I think you're gonna have to figure it out for yourself as to whether or not you want to consider Jalen Overway still Rookie of the Year. But Miles Barnstable and Ben Pierce are certainly worthy of consideration as well.
Yeah, I'll be the first to admit I'm not the best when it comes to who are going to be the All-Americans or the All-Region players or whatever. I saw Jalen Overway play 27 times. I probably only saw Barnstable and Pierce play 4, 5, 6 times. So I don't have the experience level with them as much as I had with Overway. They're all tremendous players. What Barnstable has done with his team in March has been amazing. In a lot of ways, he's been that proverbial straw that stirs the proverbial drink. Are they both proverbial, or is one literal? I don't know. But if you want to credit him for that, I think that's completely fair. That's to his resume. He's been a key part to a key team who has made a tremendous tournament run. I think that's awesome. Pierce for Emory, that was a great team, great player all year long as well. I think 3 great players to be excited about in Division III basketball, and I think you could make arguments for any one of them for any number of different reasons. Like Zach said, depends on what you're looking for and what you want to value. And I think you can make kind of a March argument that favors Barnstable. I think if we had just cut it off at conference tournament time, maybe we still would have thought Overway was the favorite. I don't know. To me, this question kind of caught me off guard. I know we kind of had that big opening weekend back in November when Overway, I think, scored like 34 against UW-Oshkosh, and Calvin had that big win. And maybe it was Ryan who even himself tweeted like early favorite for National Rookie of the Year or something. And since then it's been kind of off my radar. So I don't know. I think you got a bunch of good players here, and I think there's any answer here could be correct and would be good. A lot of deserving players.
All right, one more mailbag question here. We got kind of a double up on a topic here. From Dan on Twitter, how are officials screened and assigned to tournament sites? And then we had a response here from Jed, who wanted a +1 on that, on also wondering whether or how flop calls were actually considered in the end. Now, I wish that we had really great insight and information to answer this question, but I don't think we do. I would say that the officials, like teams, earn their way into it, and certainly probably how flop calls were handled factors into that. Now, we had heard early on that as a way to try to incentivize the flop calls as a point of emphasis, that tournament games were kind of being held over the head of officials as a way to get them to make sure that they were paying attention to what the NCAA wanted to happen as a point of emphasis. So I assume that probably did factor in. Hopefully it factored in not just that they were making flop calls, but that the flop calls that they were making were adjudicated in review to be the right calls, and not just calls because let's just blow the whistle and call a flop because that's going to take it out of the game, regardless of whether that particular call was or was not actually a flop.
My suspicion is, we heard a lot about the flop calls early on in the season, and that officials would not be assigned to tournament games if they did not call the flop calls. I believe you're correct, Zach. That's probably saying if you don't participate with us in our point of emphasis, we're not going to reward you with tournament spots. Even if you're a great official besides that, we need to call that. We're going to call it a specific way. And if you don't do that, then we're not going to consider you to be one of the top officials at the end of the season. I don't think they're being rewarded by who can call the most flop calls in a season. And that was what they wanted to do. I will say there was a episode of Hoopsville, I believe it was the marathon, where Dave McHugh had Jim Haney and Mary Toberman on. They are the national coordinators of officials for the men's basketball and women's basketball side. Unfortunately, I think there was an issue with the recording. So about I don't know how long it was into the segment, maybe like halfway or three quarters. I think it kind of got cut off, but you can hear a bunch of the interview there. A lot of good information about their backgrounds, their job at they're the national coordinators of officials. They also like work regionally with coordinating officials, but I believe they're the ones that select or participate heavily in the selection of the officials to tournament sites. So they work with the officials in the different regions, and they work on with grading the officials to make sure I think they're graded consistently across regions. I don't know how that all happens because I'm just a guy on Twitter and YouTube. But I think that those two folks have a big amount of input into who gets assigned, and they also participate from a national sense in making sure that the officials are all kind of on the same page as far as what we're looking for in officiating, the mechanics of officiating, the points of emphasis for a season, and also that when we're kind of giving officials feedback and constructive criticism, let's say, and also maybe grading them to whatever degree that is, that's kind of done consistently across the board. So Jim Haney and Mary Toberman, I believe, on the men's and women's side, do that. I think there was also an interview with like Sarah Kwiatkowski who said that maybe she was with Jim, if I'm remembering the interview correctly, when he was working with the officials, the official assignments, and she was kind of, you know, giving her inputs to whatever degree that was, you know, whether she was doing that in a serious manner or a joking manner, I wasn't quite sure, but she was next to Jim while he was doing it and said that they were kind of hanging out together at that. So I don't know what degree flop calls had an influence on that. I will say, just from an anecdotal nature, we didn't see the number of calls in January and February that we saw in November and December. I think we kind of found that balance point between what's incidental contact and what's not. I think a lot of the egregious flops did leave. I don't think we saw as many of like a 3-point shooter who's not touched just fall to the floor afterwards to try to get the call. Didn't see that as much. Did see it sometimes. So I think the call did succeed in getting some of those flops out of the game. I think we saw defenders in the post try to defend the post more than just get hit and go down, which I think makes for better basketball. It's better defense rather than just trying to get a quote unquote cheap foul, actually contest the shot, maintain verticality, go straight up. That's good defense. That's what they're trying to promote. And I think that's partially what happened. So I don't know. That's a lot of words to say. I don't know. I think the flop calls did help get some of the flop calls out of the game. I think we saw less later on. I think that was all good. I don't remember it in the tournament games I've seen so far having a huge effect. I'm sure there has been a flop called, but I can't specifically remember it happening or happening in a big moment or being like a tremendously like bad call or anything. I'm sure someone will correct me if I've forgotten one. I didn't see every tournament game for sure, but that's my perception on the matter.
Yeah, I think we also saw an adjustment where, if it was maybe there was not so much contact to warrant a player going to the floor. I'm thinking more of like shooters, a shooter going to the floor. But maybe it was a little bit marginal. I think we saw times, Matt, even games that we attended together where a player may have gotten the benefit of the doubt the first time, but then when he goes to the ground a second time, you get that call. So I think that's good. That's a good middle ground as well. You say, okay, that's no different than the old system where you get the warning, and then the technical would be called on the second one. But I think it works fine like this, where maybe you give a little bit of benefit of the doubt, and then if something like that's marginal happens again, then you think, well, maybe this guy's trying to bait it, and you make the call then.
Yeah. Yep. Definitely.
That wraps up the mailbag and wraps up the show. And Well, it's surreal to be doing a Final Four show already, Matt. It feels like the season flew by. It's been a lot of fun. I know we're both really looking forward to being in Fort Wayne. We will be leaving our respective homes after getting kids on the bus Thursday morning and making our way to Fort Wayne, where we will be meeting up with each other and other great hashtag D3 Hoops fans, and really looking forward to it. I think we're in for some great games. I think that the teams are all very deserving. I think if you gave us this list of teams at the beginning of the tournament, maybe there would be a surprise or two. But having seen it play out, all are very deserving, and there haven't been any easy paths to get here. So congratulations to those teams for reaching the Final Four. Looking forward to seeing them on the court here again Thursday and then Saturday night as we crown a national champion.
I can't wait for the Final Four. It was so fun last year. We've been counting down the days all season. I can't believe it's already here. Only 3 games left. So we have to savor these last few games, but it's going to be a fun weekend. Hope to see you all there. Zach, I will be seeing you there. We'll see if we can put out any sort of episodes or hashtag content while we're out there. We have some plans to maybe do so, so we'll see what the days hold. But looking forward to some good games. Don't know what the outcomes are going to be, but they're going to be great. So until next time, good job, team.
We'll see you from Fort Wayne.